At the beginning of every significant transformation, there comes a paradoxical stage, one that appears as a void, yet secretly functions as the womb of change. This is the stage of silence, the moment when nothing on the surface seems to move. The absence of signals, the lack of visible progress, and the withholding of external validation make the experience deeply uncomfortable. To the ordinary observer, stillness appears synonymous with stagnation or even failure. Yet the deeper reading of this stage reveals the opposite. The void is not a dead end, but a decisive test, a sign that the invisible architecture of reality is quietly being rearranged. The text paints this stillness with images of absence. No trumpets announce progress. No fireworks illuminate the sky. Only the deafening quiet of nothingness. Human instinct, conditioned to equate activity with growth, reads this as defeat. Societal norms reinforce the judgment. We are trained to measure advancement through external metrics, bank balances, job titles, relationship milestones. When these markers remain unchanged, the conditioned conclusion is that no progress is happening. The silence becomes intolerable because it seems to confirm futility. However, the teaching overturns this interpretation by asserting that energy precedes matter. What appears immobile on the surface may conceal profound movements beneath. The metaphor of the hidden army conveys this idea. At night, soldiers silently shift into position, arranging themselves for a decisive strike at dawn. The battlefield looks deserted, yet preparation is at its peak. The same is true of transformation. Inwardly, intentions are aligning, subtle energies are positioning, and unseen conditions are converging. Outward stillness hides inward orchestration. Because this stage is so counterintuitive, it becomes the filter through which few pass. The text claims that 99% of people abandon their pursuit at precisely this point. The mind demands evidence and, finding none, concludes that persistence is pointless. The inner pressure to interfere intensifies. This is where the farming metaphor offers clarity. An impatient gardener, desperate to confirm progress, digs up a seed to see if it has sprouted. In doing so, the seed is killed. The process was working, but interference destroyed it. The true enemy is not an external obstacle, but the internal habit of control. The solution offered is a change of posture. Rather than grasping in panic or quitting in despair, the practitioner is asked to cultivate readiness to receive. The metaphor of the bird clarifies the subtlety of this stance. Clutch the bird too tightly and it suffocates. Open the hand completely and it flies away. The correct balance is a cupped hand, firm enough to hold, gentle enough to breathe. This illustrates the discipline of manifestation, not clinging in fear, not abandoning in neglect, but creating a stable, receptive space where what is sought can land naturally. A second metaphor expands the argument. Silence is like a dam. On the surface, the water appears calm, but behind the barrier, pressure mounts. Each clear intention, every prayer, every honest decision adds more to the reservoir. When the gates finally open, the release is immense, capable of powering an entire city. Here, absence of visible activity is not proof of nothingness, but proof of accumulation. The longer the stillness, the greater the buildup. The void is thus reinterpreted as a gestational chamber, the deep breath before a powerful surge. From this perspective, the practical challenge becomes one of endurance. The practitioner must remain present in the emptiness without rushing to fill it. Forced actions, sending unnecessary emails, making desperate calls, refreshing financial statements endlessly, do not help. They simply echo the mind's panic. Instead, the task is to protect the garden within. This metaphor captures the necessity of tending inner space. Just as a gardener clears weeds to allow plants to grow, one must clear intrusive thoughts and anxious fears to safeguard the subtle process unfolding. Crucially, this stance is not passive resignation. It is active discipline. It requires courage to resist the urge to act from fear. It requires awareness to recognize silence as preparation rather than punishment. It requires patience to let alignment complete itself without interruption. In psychological terms, this is the shift from a scarcity mindset, always demanding proof, to a mindset of trust. In spiritual terms, it is the recognition that the universe rearranges itself invisibly before presenting change externally. The text also critiques modern productivity culture. which equates constant motion with virtue. In such a culture, stillness is misread as laziness, and waiting is misinterpreted as weakness. Yet here, stillness is reframed as strength. The true discipline lies in enduring uncertainty without collapsing into doubt. To stay steady in the silence is a rare capacity. Only a small minority manage it, and they are the ones who cross into breakthrough. Ultimately, the silence is reinterpreted not as absence, but as fullness disguised. It is the rite of passage that separates those who surrender to fear from those who trust the unseen order. To misinterpret it is to abandon the path too soon. To endure it is to join the 1% who move through the threshold. The silence is the universe's way of preparing the ground, of aligning conditions in ways the mind cannot yet perceive. Passing the test means recognizing its true nature and remaining steady until the dam bursts. In sum, the stage of silence before breakthrough is not failure, but confirmation. It is the crucible where alignment matures, the filter where most give up, and the breath before expansion. Those who endure without interference discover that stillness was never empty. It was always the fullness of becoming. This section describes a paradoxical stage in personal growth and transformation, the moment of apparent emptiness, right before a major breakthrough. At first glance, this stillness feels discouraging. Nothing seems to move. No signals appear, no external validation comes. Yet the text reframes this void as a crucial test and as evidence that invisible structures are rearranging in the background. The opening images highlight the absence of drama. No trumpets, no fireworks, only silence. The human instinct interprets silence as stagnation or failure because we are trained by society to measure progress in visible terms: money in the bank, promotions at work, or relationship milestones. When none of these external indicators shift, the conditioned response is to assume that no progress is being made. However, the narrative insists that energy precedes matter. What looks static on the surface may in fact be an unseen orchestration, like an army quietly repositioning during the night for a decisive strike at dawn. The silence therefore functions as a filter. 99% of people, the text claims, abandon their pursuit at this very stage. They interpret the absence of movement as a signal to quit. Their minds demand proof, demand evidence, and pressure them to interfere. This is where the farming metaphor comes in. An impatient gardener digs up the seed to check whether it has sprouted, thereby killing the process. The problem does not arise from external enemies, but from internal habits, specifically, the urge to control. The solution offered is a shift of inner posture. Instead of frantic desire and anxious grasping, the person must cultivate readiness to receive. The bird metaphor explains this subtle balance. Squeeze too tightly and the bird suffocates. Open the hand entirely and it flies away. The right stance is neither clinging nor neglecting, but providing a safe, balanced space where the bird chooses to stay. The broader lesson is that manifestation requires holding a middle ground, active trust rather than desperate control. Another metaphor extends the argument. Silence is like a dam. On the surface, the water seems calm, but beneath the surface, pressure builds. Every clear intention, every prayer, every honest decision adds water to the reservoir. At the right moment, the gates open, unleashing enough force to power an entire city. The absence of external activity is not proof of stagnation. It is proof of accumulation. In this view, silence is not a void, but a gestational chamber, the deep breath before a powerful release. The key practice, then, is to remain present in the emptiness without trying to fill it. Instead of busying oneself with forced actions, extra emails, extra calls, endless refreshing of data, the challenge is to maintain inner clarity and protect the garden within from intrusive fears. This garden metaphor conveys the need for maintenance of internal space. Just as a physical garden thrives when it is free from weeds and pests, the inner life thrives when it is shielded from anxious thoughts and compulsive interventions. This shift from demanding to receiving is not passivity. Rather, it is an active discipline. It requires the courage to resist the compulsion to act out of fear, the awareness to recognize that silence signals preparation, and the patience to allow alignment to complete itself. In psychological terms, It is the transition from a scarcity mindset to a mindset of trust. In spiritual terms, it is the recognition that the universe rearranges itself quietly before presenting external change. The section implicitly critiques modern productivity culture, which values constant motion and external proof. In that culture, stillness is often confused with laziness and waiting with weakness. But here, stillness is framed as strength, the ability to withstand uncertainty without collapsing into doubt. To succeed, one must endure the discomfort of silence and reinterpret it not as absence, but as confirmation that change is underway. Ultimately, the lesson of Section 1 is that silence before victory is not emptiness but fullness in disguise. It is the crucial pause where internal alignment sets the stage for external breakthrough. Those who misinterpret it abandon the path too early. Those who endure it with trust step into the rare 1% who cross the threshold. The silence, then, is not a punishment but a rite of passage. Passing this test requires recognizing its true nature and choosing to stay steady until the dam breaks. The narrative continues by reframing silence not as a void of absence, but as a fertile emptiness. Instead of being a sign that nothing is working, it is presented as a gestational chamber, where new reality is incubated. This reframing challenges the instinctive reaction most people have toward stillness, to panic, to force, or to seek constant external validation. The teaching insists that silence is not failure, but preparation. Ancient traditions support this view. Egyptian mythology is invoked, with Thoth, the scribe of the gods, recording cosmic principles in the legendary emerald tablets. For these traditions, silence was never meaningless. It was the womb of creation. Just as every seed must lie in darkness before breaking into light, every transformation requires a period of invisible gathering. The void is not empty but saturated with potential. The comparison to alchemy makes this metaphor vivid. Alchemy on the outer level aimed to transmute base metals into gold. Alchemy on the inner level sought to refine the raw matter of consciousness itself. Fear, doubt, and scarcity were the lead. Awareness, freedom, and power were the gold. The fire that drove this process was suffering. Every closed door, every disappointment, every moment of despair was interpreted as necessary, heat applied to the crucible of the self. Without such heat, the vessel would remain too fragile to hold the brilliance of a new reality. This idea transforms how one interprets hardship. What once felt meaningless is recontextualized as chemical reagent, indispensable for transformation. Just as chemical reactions require catalysts that may appear destructive, the psyche requires trials that burn away illusions. By shifting perspective, the pain of the past can be understood not as wasted suffering, but as fuel for growth. The ancients also observed the dynamics of resistance. In metallurgy, the raw material resists most intensely just before crystallization. Symbolically, this became the dark night before dawn. When life feels most oppressive or chaotic, it may be evidence not of error, but of imminent breakthrough. The old identity fights hardest when it is about to dissolve. Recognizing this pattern prevents misinterpretation. Instead of retreating, one can persist. Knowing resistance is confirmation, not condemnation. A key alchemical maxim illuminates the process. Separate the subtle from the dense. Raise it upward with skill, then return it downward. This describes a rhythm of transformation. The first step is discernment, distinguishing between clarity and confusion, truth and noise. The second is elevation, rising into wider perspective where insight is possible. The third is reintegration, returning to ordinary life with new clarity so it can shape material outcomes. Transformation is not escapism, but circulation, retreating to refine and then returning to embody. This rhythm underscores that the path is disciplined, not vague mysticism. It requires concentration, selective intake of ideas, emotional hygiene, and patience. It demands staying with the process long enough for impurities to settle. The furnace metaphor encourages perseverance. Instead of panicking at silence or fleeing into distractions, the practitioner trusts that unseen refinement is underway. Modern culture makes this especially difficult. Conditioned to equate busyness with progress, many chase noise for reassurance. Feedback, stimulation, and visible markers of activity become substitutes for actual transformation, but the teaching here insists that genuine change happens beneath the surface. The silence itself is structured. By listening closely, one can detect the underground current beginning to shift. To endure silence is to trust the architecture of reality. When this role of inner alchemist is embraced, priorities shift. The question is no longer, when will I get what I want? But who am I becoming? This pivot is crucial. Results are no longer pursued as external prizes, but seen as inevitable outcomes of identity. When the base matter of fear and scarcity is transmuted into awareness and sufficiency, outcomes follow naturally. Gold appears not because it is chased, but because the essence has been changed. This continuation fits seamlessly with the earlier lesson about silence as a test. Before, silence was described as the dam storing pressure. Here, silence is reframed as the furnace refining substance. Together, these metaphors explain why waiting and enduring are not passive but deeply active. Silence both accumulates energy and purifies the vessel. To abandon the process prematurely is to walk away just before crystallization. The implications extend beyond mysticism. Psychologically, adversity can be understood as data for growth. Every loss or rejection becomes part of the refining fire. Philosophically, real transformation is less about external acquisitions and more about becoming a vessel capable of holding them. Spiritually, silence is not death but gestation, the hidden phase without which no creation can emerge. The core lesson is therefore endurance. By staying in the crucible long enough, by resisting the urge to flee or to seek false reassurance, one eventually witnesses transformation. The shift in essence precedes the shift in form. At that point, external results cease to be mysteries. They appear as natural consequences of an identity already transmuted into gold. Once the void has been reframed as the furnace of refinement, the next challenge emerges. The paradox at the threshold of completion. Just as the fire reaches its hottest point before transmutation, so too does the human mind flare most fiercely when silence lingers. The instinct is to interpret stillness as danger. Conditioned by centuries of survival, the brain equates inaction with vulnerability. It whispers that something must be done, anything to restore a sense of control. Yet the irony is that this impulse to interfere becomes the very obstruction that delays the breakthrough. The contradiction is simple but counterintuitive. The harder one grasps, the more the flow recedes. The more one pushes to make something happen, the further away the goal appears. Progress at this stage requires not intensified effort, but a radical shift in posture. The transformation demanded is from lack to sufficiency, from chasing to attracting. The butterfly metaphor captures this logic with disarming clarity. Chase butterflies and they scatter. Tend the garden and butterflies come uninvited. It is not frantic pursuit but cultivated conditions that invite fulfillment. The core of this practice is not the addition of new steps or more sophisticated strategies. Instead, it is the alteration of being itself. Rather than sending the signal, "I do not yet have," one broadcasts, "I have prepared a place for it." This is not apathy or surrender in the sense of giving up. It is a disciplined act of non-interference, an active trust that the invisible process is unfolding. The image of the river makes this tangible. Each time panic drives the hand to seize the oar, the smooth current becomes turbulence. Yet if one trusts the same intelligence that sustains a heartbeat and spins galaxies, the unnecessary friction dissolves. Still, the mind resists this principle. Its linear logic insists, if I don't act, how will I arrive? Here the teaching introduces nuance. Action is not abolished. It is realigned. The example of gardening clarifies the distinction. To garden is to water, to weed, to provide sunlight, all within reach and appropriate. But it is not to dig up seeds each morning to check their progress. That form of interference destroys what it seeks to confirm. The lesson is that motive matters. Actions rooted in fear reinforce the frequency of scarcity. Actions rooted in steadiness reinforce the frequency of abundance. Two identical behaviors performed with different inner states yield opposite results. At this threshold, the practitioner faces a decisive question. Will you allow silence to finish its work? Those who cannot tolerate the quiet sabotage themselves by premature action. Those who can endure without interference discover that completion is not born of panic, but of identity. The harvest arrives not because of desperate doing, but because of coherent being. From a psychological perspective, this paradox describes the movement from compulsion to composure. Modern culture, especially in industrial and Western frameworks, ties worth to ceaseless motion. Anxiety convinces people that constant doing is proof of value. Yet the paradox insists the opposite. The most potent stance is relaxed confidence. By embodying sufficiency now, one attracts circumstances that reflect sufficiency. By radiating lack, one multiplies experiences of lack. This principle resembles systemic feedback loops. The dominant signal amplifies itself. Spiritually, surrender is recast as alignment. It is not laziness but the highest form of discipline, the ability to resist the reflex to meddle. It is the courage to stand still when silence feels overwhelming, trusting that a larger intelligence already governs hidden processes. Far from resignation, it is cooperation with the deeper flow of life. Philosophically, this teaching confronts the culture of productivity that equates stillness with waste and effort with virtue. The paradox proposes the opposite. Desperate effort obstructs, while trustful stillness allows. This reversal is why so many fail. Common sense says act more, but transformation at this stage demands acting less. Only a minority recognize that the determinant of arrival is identity, not frantic achievement. This insight ties seamlessly to the earlier metaphor of the furnace. Silence is the crucible that burns away impurities. Then the compulsion to control is the last dross. Just as metal resists hardest before becoming gold, the psyche resists hardest by demanding proof and grasping at control. To release this compulsion is to finish the refinement. What remains is not a seeker of outcomes, but a receiver of them. The end point of the journey, then, is not possession, but embodiment. The finish line is crossed not through grasping, but through letting go. The paradox dissolves once it is understood that what is sought has always been latent within, awaiting space rather than pursuit. The gardener must stop digging seeds, the traveler must stop fighting the current, and the seeker must stop broadcasting lack. When identity shifts from wanting to receiving, reception becomes natural. Victory belongs not to those who scramble in panic, but to those who rest in sufficiency. Silence is allowed to complete its hidden labor, and the outcome unfolds as the inevitable consequence of who one has become. After the paradox of control has been faced, the lesson that one must let go instead of grasp, the path turns toward a new discipline, the calibration of inner signals. If identity is the true driver of manifestation, then emotions are the broadcast tower, through which that identity communicates with the wider field of reality. To move from lack into sufficiency, one must not only stop grasping, but also learn to radiate the frequency of having already received. Every system of communication relies on signals, and human beings are no exception. Words and actions carry messages, but beneath them, emotional states transmit subtler signals with even greater impact. Fear, guilt, and shame are heavy and contracted. They communicate danger, insufficiency, and threat. Gratitude, joy, and love are light and expansive. They communicate safety, abundance, and trust. In this sense, the body itself acts like an antenna. What one holds internally becomes the frequency broadcast outward, which in turn attracts matching responses. The teaching emphasizes that visualization alone is not enough. Mental imagery can remain detached, like a film projected onto a screen without heat. What matters is whether the body feels the reality as if it already exists. The mind can argue endlessly, but the body does not lie. It either contracts in anxiety or opens in relief. Training the body to feel gratitude before external confirmation is the practice of anticipatory embodiment. The body leads and the mind follows. The practical exercise is deceptively simple. One chooses a single desire and suspends all questions about timing or method. Instead of asking when will it happen or how will it happen, the practitioner devotes 30 to 60 seconds to recreating the sensation of joy that arises from receiving unexpected good news. That feeling is then associated with the desired outcome. The task is not to strain at imagining, but to shift the state of being. Short, consistent repetitions are more effective than long, forced sessions. Over time, this repetition reconditions the baseline emotional state from tension to ease, from doubt to quiet confidence. At that moment, the outgoing signal has changed channels. This reframes manifestation as a matter of reflex training. Athletes condition muscle memory through repetition until their bodies perform actions automatically. Here, practitioners condition emotional memory. By repeating gratitude and relief, the body becomes accustomed to them, until they replace fear as the default setting. When gratitude dominates, the body broadcasts sufficiency even without conscious effort. In doing so, it resolves the paradox at a deeper level. The individual no longer signals lack even unconsciously. Instead, they radiate the vibration of fulfillment. Once the inner broadcast changes, the external world begins to echo it back. These reflections often appear as winks or synchronicities, subtle but meaningful confirmations. Numbers repeat on clocks, long-lost friends reappear. Song lyrics answer unspoken questions. Such events are not accidents or miracles. They are symbolic markers indicating that the emotional frequency has been registered. The universe replies, "Signal received." The guidance is to treat these winks with balance. They should not be mystified into superstition, nor dismissed as random. Acknowledgement is enough. Each recognition strengthens trust, and trust itself raises the frequency further. This generates a feedback loop. Gratitude produces synchronicities. Synchronicities reinforce trust. Trust amplifies gratitude, and the cycle accelerates. Progress does not quicken because of new external strategies, but because the inner loop is now self-reinforcing. This teaching dovetails naturally with the earlier paradox. In that lesson, the error was to fill silence with anxious effort. Here the antidote is provided. Fill silence with gratitude. Where before one was told what not to do, now one learns what to cultivate instead. Together, the two teachings establish both the restraint and the activation necessary for transformation. From a psychological lens, the principle highlights embodied cognition. Thoughts alone are weak levers if the body continues to operate under old patterns of fear. By deliberately evoking feelings of gratitude, one reprograms the body itself. Neuroscience supports this. Repeated emotional states create new neural pathways, altering baseline reactions. Over time, the nervous system adopts gratitude as its natural rhythm, changing perception and behavior alike. Philosophically, the teaching challenges the view that emotions are private and inconsequential. Here, emotions are understood as participatory signals in the construction of reality. Fear is not just internal discomfort, it is a message broadcast outward, shaping encounters. Gratitude is not just a mood, it is a declaration to the field that abundance is already present. The responsibility becomes clear. One cannot avoid broadcasting, but one can choose which station to transmit. Spiritually, gratitude emerges as a central sacrament. It is no longer courtesy or politeness, but vibrational technology. By giving thanks in advance, the practitioner collapses the distance between desire and fulfillment. Gratitude is proof of trust, and trust is the magnet that draws invisible alignment into visible form. In summary, this stage reframes emotions as the steering wheel of manifestation. By deliberately training gratitude, the practitioner broadcasts sufficiency and receives synchronicities in return. Each wink is confirmation, not to inflate the ego but to reinforce the trust loop. With gratitude as the default state, identity stabilizes in abundance. Combined with the silence of the furnace and the paradox of letting go, the cultivation of emotions completes the triad of transformation. The journey is no longer about forcing results, but about becoming a vessel that naturally attracts them, simply by radiating the frequency of fulfillment. Once the final echo has been recognized and declined with clarity, the transformation reaches its culmination. The closing of the old chapter creates space for a new declaration, the act that anchors identity in the present and sets the new trajectory beyond question. This is not about securing a single external prize, but about inhabiting a new self, one whose very posture radiates coherence. The practice is condensed into a single formula. I am the presence that receives. This statement carries profound depth. The opening words, I am, operate as a command to the subconscious. They bypass negotiation with the future and establish truth in the present. To say I am is to move from wishing to claiming, from seeking to embodying. The second phrase, the presence that receives, defines the new function. The old identity was that of a struggler, always chasing, begging, or proving. The new identity is receptive, magnetic, and centered. The declaration fuses ontology and purpose, existence itself aligned with function. The guidance is to wield this phrase as a protocol of vigilance. Whenever doubt intrudes, there is no need to argue with it or spiral into old mental loops. One simply returns to the decree. Practice, it acts like a cognitive anchor, interrupting habitual scarcity thinking and redirecting energy toward coherence. Each repetition engraves a fresh groove in the nervous system. Over time, this engraving becomes the default path, and alignment becomes second nature. Once this decision is made, external reality accelerates in its response. Delayed opportunities suddenly appear. Long-awaited calls arrive without prompting. Resources surface from unexpected places. These are not accidents and should not be dismissed as luck. They are the predictable outcome of a system that has been recalibrated. Recognizing them as consequences of inner alignment, rather than random fortune, strengthens the cycle further. The mind then sees proof not of chance, but of inevitability, and the body grows even more stable in gratitude. The larger implication is that the destination is not a series of goals ticked off one by one. To reach one milestone only to chase the next would be to repeat the cycle of lack. Instead, the destination is a continuous state of creative flow. Wealth, health, and love are described not as primary objectives, but as natural side effects of this state. They arrive as flowers arrive in spring, not because the gardener pulled at them, but because the soil was fertile and the season right. At this stage, the individual becomes more than a beneficiary. They become a beacon. The metaphor of the lighthouse conveys this shift, rooted in stability, radiant by nature, visible to others without effort. The presence itself becomes evidence that life can be lived with less resistance. This influence is not imposed but transmitted silently, like light across the sea. By embodying coherence, one invites others to trust that coherence is possible. The responsibility that remains is one of maintenance. Just as physical health requires daily choices, energetic alignment requires continual attention. The text calls this frequency hygiene. It includes tending the inner garden, cultivating gratitude, discerning between subtle and dense influences, and acting consistently from the new identity. Without maintenance, old patterns could creep back. With it, the flow remains unobstructed, and the state of receptivity deepens. The continuity from the echo to the declaration is seamless. The echo was the closing ritual, saying no to what no longer serves. The declaration is the opening ritual, saying yes to the self that has already arrived. Together they complete the metamorphosis. Seeker becomes receiver. Aspirant becomes embodiment. The door to the past closes, and the door to the future swings open, not through force but through clarity. Psychologically, this teaching highlights the power of identity-level statements. Research confirms that behavior aligns more strongly with identity than with goals. I want to run is desire. I am a runner is embodiment. The latter reshapes choices automatically, without debate. The declaration, I am the presence that receives, works the same way. It reprograms behavior by shifting the baseline of self-concept. Philosophically, the teaching moves beyond instrumental thinking. Life is reframed not as a list of problems to solve, but as a dance with larger currents. Just as blossoms emerge in their season without strain, so too do manifestations unfold when the conditions are tended. Forcing is futile. Cultivating and trusting are sufficient. Spiritually, the declaration affirms sovereignty. By saying I am, the practitioner assumes creative authority, no longer victim to circumstance but participant in a larger orchestration. Yet sovereignty here is paradoxical. It is not domination but resonance. True mastery is not control but surrender, aligning so completely with the flow that abundance becomes the natural consequence. In sum, this stage crystallizes the entire journey. Activation occurs through declaration, which anchors identity in the present. From that identity flows a cascade of confirmations, recognized not as luck, but as the natural outworking of coherence. The destination is not possession of scattered goals, but the establishment of a continuous state, creative, receptive, radiant. By practicing frequency hygiene, one ensures the state endures. Life then ceases to be a battlefield of scarcity and becomes a symphony of synchronicity. The transformation concludes not with acquisition, but with embodiment. The seeker has become the lighthouse, the steady presence that receives.